Today's lecture is about landscape appraisal. The lecture will talk about three major topics: landscape definition, landscape ecology, and landscape appraisal. So first we're going to talk about the definitions of landscape. What is a landscape? Landscape, according to Foreman and Godwin, is a heterogeneous land area composed of a cluster of interacting ecosystems that is repeated in similar form throughout. This definition focuses on groups of ecosystems and the interactions among them. Another definition is by Turner. According to him, a landscape is an area that is spatially heterogeneous in at least one factor of interest. So for him, he focuses on spatial heterogeneity and its impact on a process, while Barnes defines landscape as a heterogeneous area composed of a cluster of interacting ecosystems that are repeated in various sizes, shapes, and spatial relationships. These are the components and individual elements of a landscape. Under people or humans, these are the things that they influenced or brought to. For cultural and social, we have land use, settlement, enclosure, land ownership, and time debt. And under perceptual and aesthetics, we have memories, associations, preferences, touch and feel, smells, sounds, form, pattern, texture, and color. And for the place itself, or the area, it includes natural geology, landform, hydrology, air and climate, soils, and the land cover, or flora and fauna. There are two types of landscape: the natural landscape and then the artificial landscape. Natural landscape is an area or land in which humans indirectly change or alter. Changes on this land is made by nature, like as when wind blows trees, fire destroying vegetation, floodwaters removing rocks and soils. A good example for this one will be the contours of a shoreline. It changes as the waves hit its walls or shores. Artificial landscape is known as a man-made landscape, or some call it natural landscaping. It is an area where humans rearrange or completely alter the land and its elements to be more aesthetically pleasing in the eye by adding some other types of structures like buildings. And these are the examples for natural and artificial landscape. So as you can see here on the top left, it's a Japanese garden. And on the bottom right is the Natural Grandeur Glacier National Park of Montana. So what are the characteristics of landscapes? There are actually four characteristics of a landscape. First is the landscape structure, which is the special relationships between elements, which means the distribution of the elements in an area or a space. Landscape function, it is how the elements interact, how one element affects the other, and so on. So third is the landscape change. It is the alteration of the structure and function of the mosaic over time. And lastly, landscape management. Landscape management is the management of structure and function to achieve a desired change.
Now, after knowing what landscape is, let's proceed to landscape ecology. This is important for us to properly appraise or estimate the value or worth of a landscape. So, what is landscape ecology? Clark 2010 defined it as the pattern and interaction between ecosystems within a region of interest and the way the interactions affect ecological processes, especially the unique effects of spatial heterogeneity on these interactions. It simply means that landscape ecology studies the diversity or variability of different factors within a space. Take note that landscape is not only defined by its size, but by the unique structure, processes, and interactions within it. In landscape ecology, we look at the broad extents, the spatial patterns, and the role of human. Broad extent means that it views landscape at a wider perspective, like looking at the aerial photograph where we see the overall dimensions with a larger scope of focus, although the scale differs depending on a particular point of interest. While spatial patterns refers to the structure or arrangements of different components of a space. It considers how each components are placed or distributed with heterogeneity in a particular landscape. The role of human often focus on the changes that we create to the landscape. Human activities can dramatically alter it and the relationships between patterns and processes. As resource managers, we should learn how to be responsible stewards and to manage landscape sustainably to maintain ecological processes. Understanding these concepts of landscape will lead to a more accurate landscape appraisal that could lead to a better policy and management. This diagram shows the interactions of natural system and human system which can lead to conflicts because human activities may disrupt natural processes and negatively influence landscape structure and functions. Human population growth is indeed the main driver of change in most landscape. Human modifies natural ecosystems to build environments. Hence, understanding the environmental threats or impacts of anthropogenic activities in these natural systems will be useful in identifying suitable ecological unit for management. Landscape as a functional unit can reflect interactions of ecological and human aspects of processes. There are different landscape models that can be used for management to avoid or minimize conflicts and promote positive human and nature interactions. This path corridor matrix integrates and balances ecological and human aspects of landscape. The minimum patch area requirement will depend on the species, quality of habitat, and particular landscape context. Generally, the larger patch will be better since it can support more species of flora and fauna, especially those requiring a wider habitat or territory. The corridor is a network of linear elements that connects patches. Connectivity is an important measure of corridor functions, especially to address isolation of species in different patches. Matrix refers to developed lands which are properly planned to blend with patches and corridors that supports plant and animal community to thrive and sustain ecological functions. Stepping stones are small patches allowing species movement between large patches, which is very important for fragmented landscapes. And lastly, the buffer zones which are surrounding the sensitive patches to provide additional protection for wildlife movement along the corridors. These are important attributes and concepts of landscape ecology that needs to be considered in landscape appraisal to ensure that each will be properly considered and valued to avoid species extinction due to habitat fragmentation.
Landscape appraisal. Landscape appraisal can be defined as the process of applying set criteria to a particular landscape type, or landscape feature. These criteria can be reasonably objective, for example, condition, character, or can be more subjective, for example, value. Landscape appraisal is the systematic analytical determination and recording of property facts, investment, and values, and it can determine the monetary values at a given time of property rights encompassed in an ownership. There are four types of landscape appraisal. Landscape character is what makes one landscape different from another. It refers to the distinctive and recognizable pattern of features which makes one landscape type unique. Using the appraisal of landscape character is only viable to compare two landscape uniques of the same type. Landscape value refers to why we attach importance to landscape and how much importance we attach to that landscape. Landscapes may be valued because they are in good condition, have scenic characteristics, or express important ecological, cultural, or heritage interest. Landscape condition is related to landscape character and is the index of the integrity or intactness of the basis patterns or landscape features, which constitutes the landscape character of the type. An appraisal or landscape condition allows the comparisons of two landscapes of the same type or different types. Landscape sensitivity may be defined as a landscape ability to tolerate change without compromise to its fundamental character. These landscape appraisal methods and uses are identified by the United Kingdom Countryside Agency. We should understand the appraisal methods to distinguish between landscape values method and other landscape appraisal methods, such as condition, character, and sensitivity. Each method can deliver to different users depending on their possible future. If our landscape users publish their development capacity statement in the future, landscape appraisal sensitivity methods is an appropriate method by using landscape change indicator such as sensitivity to drought, soil moisture, wind erosion, and sensitivity to road development and sensitivity to industrial development and so on. If our landscape users target to landscape guidelines committees, we should apply landscape character appraisal method using indicators such as openness, coherence, and diversity, and so on. If our landscape users focus on landscape management strategy in the future, we should follow the landscape condition methods using indicators such as water waste, biodiversity, land, and community, and so on. The affected landscape indicators are mostly taken into account in landscape appraisal. It varies on the objectives of the landscape study. Landscape value appraisal is appropriate methods for landscape designations uses. It's essential to understanding of the appraisal process to distinguish between landscape value and the other basis of appraisal methods. In landscape value appraisal method, mapping of both landscape types and landscape areas using automatic GIS-based techniques can provide vital assistance, and that should be followed by the interactive such as field-based, workshop-based, and objective examination and refinements of the outputs. For definition and mapping of landscape areas factors that covers natural science, human use, and human experience of the landscape are essential. As earlier explanation in landscape method and uses, this table is describing the relationship between output or landscape studies and method or appraisal. Where design guidelines are to be developed, landscape character is an appropriate basis for appraisal because in order to derive guidelines, it's important to know what the basis patterns or landscape feature is and how future development should relate to them. Where the objectives of the study is the designation or related values to landscapes, and assessments or landscape values will be appropriate, which allows the comparisons of landscapes of different types. Where a landscape management strategy is the proposed output of the assessment study, and appraisals or landscape condition will be appropriate because in order to derive management guidelines for the restoration, enhancement, conservation, etc. of a landscape, it's necessary to know its existing condition. Finally, where the objectives of the assessment is to identify the development capacity of landscape, appraisals or sensitivity will be appropriate as it's necessary to know how easily affected a landscape character will be to a given change. We should keep in mind that the process of appraisal developed for any given landscape assessment should correspond to fundamental objectives and output of the study. To sum up, larger scale development requires the preparation landscape appraisals to provide an understanding of the landscape context and setting of the proposal. Landscape appraisals also provide a sound basis for the evaluation of the design development. These appraisals are often further developed to provide supporting environmental information for developers as part of their planning application. Thanks so much for your watching. Please feed and free feedbacks on this video presentation.